"Ma'am, I see his daughter every day." The guard didn't even hesitate when he said it. He leaned back in his chair like he'd told that line 100 times before, like it was routine. Then he tilted his chin toward the glass doors behind him. "There she is coming out right now." I followed his gaze. A young woman stepped through the security doors with the kind of confidence that didn't ask for permission. She wore a tailored navy coat, her posture straight, her expression calm. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. Everyone around her already knew who she was supposed to be. She walked right past the checkpoint without stopping. Without being asked. Without being questioned. The guard gave me a small, almost amused smile like he'd just proven a point. "You see," he said, "happens all the time. Folks think they can just walk in here and say they're family." I didn't answer right away. I just stood there watching her disappear down the corridor like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. Because according to him, she did. I let out a slow breath, keeping my voice steady. "Well," I said quietly, "that's interesting." The guard chuckled, already turning back to his paperwork. "So, unless you've got ID that says otherwise, I'm gonna have to ask you to step aside." I nodded once. Not offended. Not surprised. Just thinking. Because if she was his daughter, then who had I been all these years? I looked down at the visitor badge still in my hand. It felt suddenly lighter than it should have, like it didn't carry any weight at all. Then I looked back up at the door she'd just walked through. And I made a decision. "All right," I said, slipping the badge into my pocket. "I understand." The guard relaxed immediately, like the situation had resolved itself. But it hadn't. Not even close. Because I wasn't leaving. I was going to play along. I hadn't been back to my father's base in over 3 years. Not since the last time I'd stood in a room full of uniforms that outranked me in every possible way and realized I didn't belong in any of them. Not since I'd decided that whatever my father was, whatever he represented, it wasn't something I wanted to stand in the shadow of. At least that's what I told myself. The truth was simpler. I didn't understand him. Not really. To the world, he was General Thomas Hale, 4 stars, a man whose name carried weight in rooms I would never enter, the kind of man people stood up for when he walked in, the kind of man who didn't have to raise his voice to be heard. To me, he was just Dad. Or at least he used to be. We spoke on the phone a few times a year, holidays mostly, birthdays when we remembered. Our conversations were polite, careful, like 2 people who knew each other well enough not to ask the wrong questions. 3 weeks ago, he called me himself. That alone was unusual. "Are you in town?" he asked. "No," I said. "Should I be—" A pause. "Then you might want to come by the base." No explanation. No details. Just that. I almost didn't go. But something in his voice. Not urgency. Not worry. Something else. Something measured. Like he had already made a decision and I was just being given the chance to catch up to it. So I drove out this morning. I wore something simple, neutral, nothing that would draw attention, no assumptions, no expectations. And within 5 minutes of arriving, I was being told I didn't exist. I stepped away from the checkpoint, moving toward the waiting area off to the side. A few plastic chairs, a coffee machine that had seen better days, and a view of the same hallway that woman had disappeared into. From here I could watch. And that's exactly what I did. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. People came and went, officers, enlisted personnel, civilians with badges clipped neatly to their jackets. No one stopped me, no one asked me to leave. I was just another visitor. Another person with no real place in the system. Until I saw her again. She came back through the same doors slower this time, talking to a man in uniform mid-level, maybe a colonel. His posture was relaxed around her. Familiar. Too familiar. She smiled at something he said. Not overly friendly, not inappropriate. Just comfortable. Like she had earned that space. I leaned forward slightly, watching the way they moved together. The way the guards at the checkpoint didn't even glance up when she passed again. No ID check. No confirmation. Nothing. The colonel stopped just short of the exit, saying something low enough I couldn't hear. She nodded, then continued on her own, heading toward the parking lot. For a moment I considered following her, seeing where she went. But that wasn't the point. The point was inside. I leaned back in my chair, letting my eyes drift back to the checkpoint. The guard from earlier was still there, same posture, same relaxed confidence. Certain of what he knew. Certain of who he had seen every day. I stood up. Walked back toward the desk. He looked up as I approached, recognition flickering across his face. "Oh," he said, "you still here?" I smiled just a little. "Just waiting for a ride," I said. He nodded, already losing interest. That was fine. I didn't need his attention. I needed his routine. I glanced at the badge scanner beside him, watched as another officer walked up, tapped his card, and passed through without a word. Simple. Predictable. Repeatable. I let a few more minutes pass, watched, listened, learned. Then when the moment felt right, I moved. Not quickly, not hesitantly. Just naturally. Like I had done it before. Like I belonged. I stepped into line behind a group of personnel heading through the checkpoint, close enough not to stand out, not so close that anyone would question it. The guard barely looked up. One by one they scanned their badges. The door opened. Closed. Opened again. My turn. I didn't have a badge. But I had something else. Timing. The officer in front of me scanned his card and stepped through. I followed half a second behind, just as the door was still closing. The guard said something, but it wasn't sharp, not alarmed. Just routine. "Hey, ma'am." I turned slightly, meeting his eyes with the same calm expression I'd seen on her face. Confident. Unbothered. Expected. He hesitated. Just for a second. And in that second, I was already inside. The door clicked shut behind me. And just like that, I was no longer a visitor. I was part of the system. At least for now. I walked forward without looking back, my pulse steady, my mind clear. Somewhere deeper in the building, my father was waiting. And if he knew what was happening at his own gate, then this wasn't a mistake. It was a test. And I had just decided to take it. I kept walking as though I knew exactly where I was going. That was the first rule I remembered. Not from my father, but from years of being his daughter. People questioned uncertainty faster than they questioned access. If you looked lost in a place that ran on rank and routine, somebody would notice. If you moved with purpose, most people stepped aside. The hallway beyond the checkpoint was quieter than I remembered. Polished floors, pale government walls, framed unit photographs, a display case holding plaques, challenge coins, and retirement gifts from commands I only recognized because I'd heard their names across dinner tables when I was younger, and still foolish enough to think men like my father spent their lives talking about medals. In truth, he had rarely talked about the work at all. He came home with silence on him the way other men came home with cigarette smoke or engine grease. I passed a reception desk staffed by a woman in civilian clothes, maybe late 50s, glasses on a chain around her neck. She looked up briefly, saw my face, then looked back down at her computer. Either I had been mistaken for someone expected, or she had learned the same lesson as the guard: don't challenge what appears to belong. I took the left corridor not because I knew where it led, but because the woman from the checkpoint and the colonel had disappeared in that direction earlier. A posted directory listed administrative offices operations, planning, legal liaison communications, and command suites on the upper level. The farther I walked, the clearer it became that this was no simple front office arrangement. The building ran on layers public enough to allow visitors at the gate, private enough to hide what mattered 2 doors deeper. At the end of the corridor, I slowed near a bulletin board covered in notices: family readiness meetings, blood drives, retirement ceremonies, chapel announcements. The ordinary life of a military base was all there in thumbtacks and printer ink. It grounded the place. People married here, raised children here, lost friends here, retired here. For all the stars and salutes, most of military life still came down to casseroles after funerals, and somebody's wife organizing blankets for a storm drive. That ordinary quality made what I had just seen feel stranger, not less. I heard footsteps and turned just enough to avoid looking obvious. The same colonel from earlier was coming down the hall with a folder tucked beneath one arm. Mid-50s, trim silver at the temples, easy stride. The kind of man who had spent decades inside systems and learned how to make himself look indispensable without appearing hungry. He stopped near a door marked Executive Operations and glanced behind him. A second later, the young woman appeared. Up close, she looked more polished than before. Early 30s, perhaps. Dark hair pinned neatly, tasteful jewelry. No badge visible from where I stood, though she moved as though she had one. She wasn't dressed like military family. She looked like someone who understood exactly how much money and discipline it took to appear effortless. The colonel lowered his voice. I edged nearer the board and pretended to read a flyer about a volunteer luncheon. "You'll need to be careful this afternoon," he said. "I always am," she replied. Her voice was low and composed with the faintest trace of southern softness under the polish. She sounded practiced, too, not theatrical, prepared. "The briefing's been moved up," he said. "No extra stops." She gave one small nod. Understood. Then she smiled at him in a way that made my stomach tighten, not flirtatious, not affectionate, but allied. The smile of one person who knows another is covering the road ahead. He handed her the folder. Not openly, not secretly, smoothly. If I had blinked, I might have missed it. She tucked it beneath her arm and continued down the hall without another word. The colonel watched her go for half a second, then turned the other direction. I stayed where I was until both were gone. My father had spent his whole life teaching me one lesson without ever sitting down to say it: when something is wrong, don't react too quickly. Let the shape of it appear. So I let it. The woman was not a harmless social visitor. No one moved that comfortably through restricted space by accident. No one got handed a folder in a hallway outside executive operations unless the handoff mattered. And the colonel, whatever his exact role was, too seasoned to be careless. I moved again, slower this time. At the next intersection, I caught sight of the woman entering a smaller conference room just off a side corridor. The door didn't close all the way. I passed by without looking in, then stopped at a water fountain 20 feet beyond it. The hum of voices drifted out. One male voice, hers, then another man's, younger, sharper. I waited until footsteps echoed from farther down the hall, creating just enough ambient noise to cover my own movement. Then I stepped back and angled myself near the half-latched door. "Said he'd sign off if the general never sees the full chain," the younger man was saying. "He won't," the woman replied. "Not if today goes the way it's supposed to." I felt the back of my neck turn cold. The first male voice, older, likely the colonel, spoke next. "No improvising. We're too far in for mistakes." "Too far in." "Not starting." "Not considering." "In." I heard paper slide across a table. Then the woman said something that made me go absolutely still. "If anyone asks, I was in the family office most of the morning. They're used to seeing me there." The family office. It was such an odd phrase that I nearly doubted my own hearing. My father had no family office. He had never been that kind of man. He handled personal matters the same way he handled everything else, privately, directly, and without decoration. The phrase sounded invented. A title designed to justify presence. A title repeated often enough to become routine. Suddenly, the guard's words at the gate took on a darker shape. "I see his daughter every day." Not daughter. Position. A role someone had built and fed into the building until everyone stopped questioning it. I backed away before they could finish. I didn't need more yet. What I needed was to avoid being seen too soon. I turned the corner and nearly collided with a young lieutenant carrying a stack of binders. He caught one before it slipped and gave me a quick, apologetic smile. "Sorry, ma'am." "No harm done," I said. He looked at me again as though trying to place my face. Not suspiciously, curiously. Then his eyes widened just a touch. "Oh, I didn't realize you were back." Back. My heartbeat didn't change, but something inside me sharpened. "I just arrived," I said carefully. He nodded too fast. Of course, my mistake. Before I could ask what he meant, a buzzer sounded down the hall, and an overhead speaker announced that senior staff should report to briefing in 10 minutes. The lieutenant hurried off. I stood there for one quiet moment and understood two things at once. First, this woman had been here long enough to be recognized as part of the structure. Second, I wasn't the only one some people expected to see. Whatever game was being played inside my father's command, it wasn't built on one lie. It was built on many small ones repeated until they became the air in the room. And for the first time since I stepped through that checkpoint, I stopped feeling like an outsider who had wandered into danger. I felt like someone my father had expected all along. That was the thought I was still holding when a deep, familiar voice sounded from behind me. "You got farther than most people do." I turned. My father stood at the end of the corridor in full dress uniform, 4 silver stars on his shoulders, his face unreadable. He did not look surprised to see me. He looked late to a meeting he had been willing to postpone only once. For a moment I didn't move. I had imagined this meeting in a dozen different ways over the past 3 years. Awkward, formal, maybe even distant. But not this, not him standing there like he had been watching the entire time. "You got farther than most people do," he repeated. His voice hadn't changed. Still low, still controlled. The kind of voice that didn't need to rise to carry authority. I took a step toward him. "I had help," I said. His eyes shifted just slightly toward the hallway behind me, the direction of the conference room, then back to me. "Yes," he said, "you did." That was all. No surprise, no questions. Just confirmation. And in that moment, everything inside me settled into place. "You knew," I said. It wasn't a question. He held my gaze for a long second, then gave a small nod. "I suspected," he replied. "Now I know." I let out a slow breath. "So the guard at the gate, the lieutenant, the colonel—" "Conditioned," he said. "Over time." The word landed heavier than anything else he could have said. Not fooled. Not mistaken. Conditioned. Like it had been done carefully, repeatedly, quietly. I crossed my arms not out of defensiveness but to steady myself. "And you let it happen." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped past me and gestured down the hall. "Walk with me." I followed. We moved side by side, his pace measured, unhurried. Anyone passing us would have seen nothing unusual, just a general and a civilian walking through his command. But I felt it. The shift. The weight of what wasn't being said. "You think I let it happen," he said finally. "I think you didn't stop it," I replied. A faint hint of something, almost a smile, touched the corner of his mouth. "Stopping it too early," he said, "would have solved the wrong problem." I glanced at him. "And what's the right problem?" He stopped walking. So did I. Then he turned to face me fully. "The question isn't who she is," he said. "The question is who benefits from her being here." I held his gaze. "And you didn't know." "I didn't have proof," he said. "Not the kind that holds when people start denying things." That sounded like him. Not reactive, not impulsive. Deliberate. Always deliberate. "So you built a case," I said. I watched he corrected. I waited. I thought about the conversation I'd overheard. The folder, the mention of the briefing. "They're moving today?" I said quietly. His expression didn't change, but I saw it. That small shift in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "they are." "And you knew that too." "I knew something would happen soon," he replied. "Your timing helped." I almost laughed at that. "My timing?" He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You showed up unannounced. Walked through a restricted checkpoint without authorization. Observed without interfering." A pause. "That's not an accident." I studied him. "You think I came here as part of your plan?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you came here because you knew something was wrong, even if you didn't know what." I opened my mouth to argue, then stopped. Because he wasn't wrong. I hadn't known why his call had unsettled me. But it had. And I had come anyway. He turned and resumed walking. "This way," he said. We moved toward a secured door at the end of the corridor. He entered a code, scanned his badge, and the door unlocked with a soft click. Inside was a smaller office, quiet, controlled, removed from the rest of the building. A desk, 2 chairs, a wall-mounted monitor displaying security feeds from different parts of the base. He gestured for me to sit. I didn't. Not yet. "I heard them," I said, "in the conference room." His eyes flicked to me. "What did you hear?" "Enough," I said. "She's not acting alone." "I know." "The colonel—" "Chief of staff," he corrected. That made sense. Too much sense. "And the other one," I continued. "Younger, nervous." He nodded once. "We've identified him." I exhaled slowly. "So what's the plan?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to the monitor and tapped a key. One of the camera feeds expanded, showing the hallway outside the conference room I had just left. A few seconds later, the door opened. The woman stepped out. She looked composed, controlled, exactly as before. But now I knew better. "She believes she's invisible," my father said. "She's not," I replied. "No," he agreed, "she's not." Another feed came up, this one showing the briefing room. Officers were beginning to take their seats, papers being arranged. Conversations kept low. Routine. On the surface. She'll move during the briefing, he said. How? He reached over and picked up a folder from his desk. Held it up. This, he said. I looked at it, then back at him. A decoy, I asked. A test, he corrected. Of course it was. Everything with him was a test. And if she takes it, I asked. Then we confirm the chain, he said. And if she doesn't? He set the folder back down. Then we wait longer. I shook my head slightly. You've been waiting how long? Long enough, he said. I studied him for a moment. Then asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my mind since I saw that woman walk through the checkpoint. Why didn't you tell me? I said. He met my eyes. Because I didn't know if I could trust you with it. The honesty of it didn't sting the way it might have once. Instead, it felt fair. And now I asked. A pause. Then, you walked in without a badge, he said. Observed, adapted, didn't react emotionally. Another pause. I trust what you do more than what you say. That sounded exactly like him. I nodded once. All right, I said, then tell me what you need. He studied me for a moment longer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Stay exactly where you are, he said. I frowned slightly. That's it. That's it. I glanced at the monitor again. The woman was moving down the hallway, heading toward the briefing room. Seems like I could be more useful than that, I said. You could, he agreed, but usefulness isn't the same as control. I looked back at him. And you want control. I need control, he corrected. A beat passed between us. Then I understood. He wasn't just watching them. He was controlling the board. Every move. Every piece. Including me. I leaned back slightly, crossing my arms. All right, I said, I'll stay. He nodded once. Then turned back to the monitor. The briefing room was nearly full now. The stage was set. And somewhere in that room, a lie was about to reveal itself. I watched the screen, my pulse steady, my mind clear. For the first time since I stepped onto the base, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was part of the plan. And whatever happened next was already in motion. I stayed where he told me to stay. It went against instinct. Every part of me wanted to move, wanted to follow her, to stand inside that briefing room and watch it unfold from the front row. But my father had never confused activity with control, and I'd learned long ago that the quickest way to lose both was to act too soon. So I sat in the chair opposite his desk, hands folded loosely in my lap, eyes on the monitor. On the screen, the briefing room had filled to capacity. Senior officers took their seats with the quiet efficiency that came from years of doing the same thing at the same hour in different buildings across the country. Papers aligned, pens set down, phones silenced. It was a room trained to be ready before the meeting began. She entered last. Not late, precisely on time. The door opened and she stepped in with the same composure I'd seen at the gate at the checkpoint in the hallway. No badge check, no hesitation. The man at the door gave her a brief nod and stepped aside. She didn't look at anyone directly, but I watched the way people noticed her. Not in a startled way, not even in a curious one. Just a subtle shift, shoulders, straightening eyes, lifting the smallest adjustment in posture that signaled recognition. Familiarity. Acceptance. Conditioned, my father had said. The words settled in again, heavier now. Watch the left side of the room, he said quietly. I followed his instruction. The Chief of Staff, Colonel Brenner, sat 3 seats down from the head of the table. He had his folder open, a pen resting between his fingers. From this distance, he looked exactly like what he was supposed to be: experienced, composed, focused on the work in front of him. Nothing about him suggested risk. Nothing about him suggested ambition beyond the acceptable. But I had seen the hallway. I had heard his voice. He didn't look toward her when she entered. He didn't need to. The connection between them had already been established elsewhere, out of sight, where it couldn't be measured. Most people watch the loud ones, my father said. They miss the ones who don't need to be. I nodded slightly. And the younger man, I asked. He tapped a key, switching the angle. The second camera showed the far end of the table. There. Mid-30s maybe, short-cropped hair, lean build, his uniform crisp but not worn with the same ease as the others. He adjusted his papers too often, looked up too quickly. His attention wasn't on the meeting. It was on her. "Captain Ellis," my father said, "logistics liaison." "He looks like he's waiting for a cue," I said. "He is." The room settled as my father entered the frame. Even on the screen, his presence changed the air. Conversations ended without being asked to end. Chairs straightened. The quiet that followed wasn't forced, it was expected. He took his seat at the head of the table. "Good morning," he said. No raised voice, no unnecessary words. Just enough. The briefing began. Routine updates first, operations, personnel, supply chain movements. It all sounded exactly like what it was meant to be, the steady, unremarkable rhythm of a functioning command. But I wasn't listening to the content. I was watching the edges. Watching her. Watching him. Watching the space between them. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then my father did something small, so small that no one outside the room would have noticed. He closed his folder. "Before we move on," he said, "I'd like to review the revised logistics projections." He didn't look at anyone in particular. But the effect was immediate. Captain Ellis stiffened. Just slightly. Colonel Brenner's pen paused above the page. And she didn't move at all. "Captain Ellis," my father continued, "you have the updated figures." Ellis cleared his throat. "Yes, sir." He reached for his folder. Not the one in front of him. The one just to his left. I leaned forward in my chair, the motion almost unconscious. "That's not his," I said quietly. "No," my father replied, "it's not." On the screen, Ellis opened the folder. I saw it then. The faint mark in the corner of the top page, a subtle notation, nothing obvious. The kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. Or unless you had put it there yourself. A decoy. A test. Ellis began to speak, reading from the page. His voice was steady at first, confident enough to pass. But the numbers didn't match the earlier report. They couldn't. Because they had been altered. Not dramatically. Just enough. Just enough for someone who wasn't supposed to have access to them to reveal that they did. I watched the room. Some of the officers frowned slightly, not in alarm, in confusion. Brenner spoke next. "Those figures don't align with the previous projections," he said calmly. Ellis hesitated. For half a second. Then he adjusted. "Updated this morning, sir," he said. Brenner nodded once. As if that made sense. As if he expected it. I felt something settle into place. "They've done this before," I said. "Yes," my father replied, "more than once." On the screen, she finally moved. Just a shift of her hand. A small adjustment of the folder in front of her. But it was enough. Enough to confirm that she knew exactly what was happening. That she had expected this moment. "That's her signal," I said. My father didn't answer. He didn't need to. Because the next move wasn't hers. It was his. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression unchanged. "Captain," he said, "would you mind explaining how those revisions were authorized?" The room went still. Ellis looked up. Directly at him. For the first time since the meeting began. He started. And stopped. Because there was no good answer. No clean path forward. Only the one they had prepared. I watched his eyes flicker. Toward Brenner. Then. Toward her. Just for a second. But it was enough. It was always enough. Sir Ellis said, forcing his voice back into place, the adjustments were made based on updated supply reports. Which were reviewed by my father asked. Another pause. Longer this time. By operations staff, sir. Names, my father said. No anger. No pressure. Just a request. Ellis swallowed. And in that moment, I saw it. The fracture. Small. But irreversible. Because the system they had built, the routine, the conditioning, the quiet repeated lies, it only worked as long as no one asked the wrong question. My father had just asked it. And there was no rehearsed answer left. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "This is where it breaks," I said. My father's eyes stayed on the screen. "No," he said. A beat. Then quietly. "This is where it reveals." On the monitor, Ellis opened his mouth again. And this time, whatever he said next would decide everything. Ellis opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For a moment, the room held its breath with him. 30 years in uniform had taught most of the men and women at that table how to sit through silence without flinching. They knew when something had shifted even if they didn't yet know what. My father didn't move. He didn't press. He simply waited. It was the kind of waiting that made people reveal more than any question ever could. Sir Ellis said finally, his voice tighter than before, "The names are in the appendix." He tapped the folder. Not the one that belonged to him. The one he wasn't supposed to have. I felt my jaw set just a fraction. That was his choice then. To lean into it. To trust the system that had carried him this far. On the monitor, Colonel Brenner reached for his own copy of the documents, flipping to the same section Ellis had referenced. His movements were smooth, practiced. Not a trace of uncertainty. "Appendix C," he said almost helpfully. He didn't look at Ellis when he said it. He didn't need to. The room followed along, pages turned, pens hovered, a few heads nodded as if the explanation made sense. It was almost convincing. Almost. My father let it settle for exactly 3 seconds. Then he spoke. "Appendix C," he repeated. "That's interesting." He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "Because Appendix C," he said, "was removed from the official distribution at 0600 this morning. No one moved. Not at first. Then I saw it. A ripple. Not visible in large gestures. No one stood up. No one raised their voice. But in a room like that, the smallest changes were the loudest. A pen stilled. A page stopped mid-turn. Ellis froze. And Brenner did something even more telling. He didn't look surprised. He looked thoughtful, as if recalculating. They must have been working from an earlier version, Brenner said, calm and even. Circulation delays happen, especially when updates are made close to briefing. It was a good answer. Clean. Plausible. The kind of answer that would satisfy most people in most rooms. But not this one. Not today. My father turned his head slightly, finally looking directly at Brenner. "Colonel," he said, "are you suggesting that Captain Ellis accessed outdated material and presented it as current without verification?" Brenner held his gaze. "I'm suggesting," he said, "that we clarify the timeline before drawing conclusions." Measured. Careful. Still trying to control the pace. I watched Ellis. His breathing had changed. Subtle, but there. His shoulders weren't as steady as before. His eyes moved too quickly between Brenner, the papers, and my father. He was waiting. Waiting for direction. Waiting for permission to correct course. But Brenner didn't give it. Not yet. Because the plan, whatever it had been, relied on confidence. On momentum. And that momentum had just been interrupted. My father leaned back again as if considering the suggestion. "Very well," he said. "Let's clarify." He reached down beside his chair and lifted a second folder. Not the one on the table. A different one. Identical on the outside. But not on the inside. Even through the monitor I could feel the shift in the room. Because now there were 2 versions of the same thing. 2 realities. And only one of them was real. "This," my father said, holding the folder up just enough for the room to see, "is the official version of the report distributed at 0600. He set it down in front of him. "Captain," he continued, "would you mind reading the figures from page 4? Ellis didn't move. "Captain," my father repeated. Ellis swallowed. "Yes, sir." He turned to the page. But before he could speak, a voice cut in. "Sir." It was her. For the first time since the meeting began, she spoke. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. She sat, composed, hands folded lightly over her own folder. No sign of panic, no sign of urgency. Just control. "If I may," she said, "there seems to be some confusion regarding document versions. I was present during the early morning revisions." My pulse slowed. Not sped up. Slowed. Because this was the move. She wasn't retreating. She was stepping forward. Taking ownership. My understanding, she continued, is that multiple drafts were circulated among staff before final approval. It's possible Captain Ellis received one of those interim copies. Her tone was calm. Professional. Respectful. She didn't look at Ellis. She didn't look at Brenner. She looked only at my father. And for a moment, just a moment, I could see how this had worked. how she had become part of the system. She didn't challenge authority. She aligned with it. Just enough. Just often enough. To be trusted. To be accepted. To be invisible. My father regarded her quietly. "And you are?" he asked. The question landed like a stone in still water. Not loud, but impossible to ignore. A flicker, just the smallest flicker, crossed her face. Then it was gone. "Clara," she said, "I assist with family liaison and administrative coordination." Family liaison. There it was again. The invented role. The comfortable lie. My father nodded once as if considering it. "And your authorization for access to these materials?" he asked. Another pause. Shorter this time, but sharper. "I've been working with Colonel Brenner's office," she said. Not a direct answer. A deflection. Clean, efficient, and entirely dependent on one thing. Brenner backing it. I watched him. This was the moment. The decision point. He could distance himself. He could contain the damage. Or he could commit. He chose. "She has clearance through my office," Brenner said. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Full alignment. And just like that, the line was drawn. Not between right and wrong, but between truth and what they had built in its place. I leaned back slowly in my chair, the weight of it settling in. "They're all in," I said quietly. My father didn't look at me. He didn't need to. "Yes," he said. On the screen, he closed the second folder. Gently. Deliberately. Then he looked around the room. Not at one person. At all of them. "Good," he said. A single word. But it carried something new. Not curiosity. Not patience. Finality. Because that, he continued, makes the next part much simpler. The room didn't react. Not yet. But I felt it. That shift. That moment when control fully changes hands. The trap wasn't being set anymore. It had already been sprung. And for the first time, they were starting to realize it. No one spoke. For a few seconds, the room held that fragile balance between confidence and doubt, the place where people who had been certain a moment ago began to reconsider what they thought they knew. My father let it sit. He didn't rush the moment. He never did. Then he reached for the small control panel beside him and pressed a single button. The lights dimmed slightly. The monitor at the front of the briefing room came to life. At first it showed nothing unusual. Just a hallway. A familiar one. The same corridor outside executive operations. I leaned forward in my chair without realizing it. Because I knew what was coming. On the screen, time-stamped footage began to play. 0607 hours. The hallway was quiet. Then, the door opened. Clara stepped out. She looked exactly as she had earlier, composed, controlled, unremarkable. But now every eye in the room was watching her. Not as background. As evidence. She moved down the hallway. Stopped. And a moment later, Colonel Brenner entered the frame. The same easy stride, the same measured calm. He spoke to her briefly. The audio wasn't loud, but it was clear enough. No extra stops. Her reply came just as steady. "I always am." A few heads in the room turned toward Brenner. He didn't move. On the screen, he handed her the folder. The same one Ellis had used. The same one that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The room didn't react all at once. It never does. Instead, it happened in pieces. A chair creaked. Someone exhaled too sharply. A pen dropped. Small things, but each one louder than the last. The footage continued. Clara walked away. Brenner remained in the hallway for a moment longer, then turned, and looked directly into the camera. Not startled. Not surprised. Just aware. The video froze on that frame. My father stood. Slowly. Not in anger. Not in triumph. Just in control. "Captain Ellis," he said, his voice. "Even would you like to revise your earlier statement?" Ellis didn't answer. He stared at the screen like it might change if he looked long enough. Like it might give him a different ending. It didn't. He began. Then stopped. Because there was nothing left to say. My father turned slightly. "Colonel Brenner," he said. Brenner didn't look at the screen. He looked at my father. Steady. Measured. But the ease was gone. Just enough to notice. "Sir," he said. "Your office provided clearance," my father continued. "Would you like to clarify the nature of that authorization?" Brenner held his gaze. For a moment I thought he might try again. Try to reshape it. Reframe it. But something in the room had shifted too far. The evidence wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was a record. And records? Records don't argue. They remain. "She assisted with administrative coordination," Brenner said finally. "Careful. Still careful. And the transfer of restricted documents," my father asked. A pause. Longer this time. Brenner's jaw tightened slightly. "I'll need to review the full context before making a statement," he said. There it was. The retreat. Not denial. Not admission. Delay. My father nodded once. "As you wish," he said. Then he turned his attention to Clara. She hadn't moved. Not even when the video played. Not even when the room shifted around her. She sat exactly as she had before. Hands folded. Back straight. Composed. But now the room saw her. Not as a familiar presence. As a question. "And you," my father said. Her eyes met his. Calm. Still calm. "Yes, sir. You stated you assist with family liaison." "I do." "For which family?" A beat. Then, "Yours, sir." The answer landed softly. But it carried weight. Because it wasn't entirely a lie. That was the clever part. The dangerous part. My father studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Number." Just that. No anger. No raised voice. Just no. "You assist with access," he continued. "Access you were not authorized to have." The room went still again. But this time it wasn't uncertainty. It was clarity. He stepped away from the table. One measured step at a time. Until he stood at the head of the room. Between them. Between the truth and what they had tried to build in its place. "Security will enter this room in 30 seconds, he said. No one reacted immediately. Then, the sound of the door unlocking. Footsteps in the hallway. Firm. Precise. Expected. Clara's composure shifted then. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone untrained to notice. But I saw it. The smallest tightening around her eyes. The calculation. The realization. This wasn't a moment she could talk her way through. This wasn't a system she could blend into. This was the end of it. The door opened. 2 military police officers stepped inside. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. They had orders. "Colonel Brenner, my father said you are relieved of duty pending formal investigation." No hesitation. No softness. Just fact. Brenner stood slowly. For the first time since I had seen him. He looked his age. Not weak. But human. "I understand," he said. Clara remained seated. The officers approached her next. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we're going to need you to come with us." She stood. Gracefully. Even now. Even at the end. She didn't resist. She didn't argue. She simply adjusted. Like someone who had always known this was a possible outcome. As they guided her toward the door, she glanced back once. Not at Brenner. Not at Ellis. At my father. And for a brief second, something passed between them. Not respect. Not quite. Recognition. Of the game. Of the outcome. Of who had controlled it from the beginning. Then she was gone. The door closed behind her. And just like that, the room exhaled. My father turned back to the table. His gaze moved across each face. Not accusing. Not lingering. Just acknowledging. "You are trained to trust what you see repeatedly," he said. "That is not a failure." A pause. "But it is a vulnerability." No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. The system had been tested. And it had broken. Not entirely. But enough. Enough to matter. I leaned back in my chair, letting the tension settle out of my shoulders. "It's over," I said quietly. My father didn't look at me. But I heard it in his voice when he answered. "No," he said. A beat. Then, "It's accounted for." And somehow, That felt more final than anything else. The room didn't return to normal. Not right away. People gathered their folders, but more slowly than before. Chairs slid back with a softer sound. Conversations, when they began again, stayed low, careful, like everyone was aware that something fundamental had just shifted under their feet. No one rushed out. Not even the ones who probably had somewhere else to be. Because moments like that don't end when the door closes. They linger. They settle into the walls, into the habits, into the way people look at one another afterward. My father dismissed the room with a simple nod. That will be all he said. No speech, no lecture. Just enough. One by one they stood. Some of them glanced at him on their way out, brief, respectful, perhaps a little more thoughtful than they had been an hour ago. Others avoided looking at anyone at all. Captain Ellis paused at the door. He didn't turn around. "Sir," he said, not quite steady. "Yes." A beat. Then, "I should have checked." My father didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said, "you should have." There was no anger in it. Just truth. Ellis nodded once, then left. The door closed. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just complete. I watched the empty chairs on the screen for a moment longer, then leaned back and exhaled slowly. Well, I said that answers a few questions. My father turned off the monitor. The room dimmed slightly as the screen went dark. "It answers the ones that mattered," he said. I studied him. "You already knew most of it," I said. "I knew enough to wait," he replied. "And now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window on the far wall. It looked out over a stretch of the base orderly rows of buildings, a flag moving in the breeze, a handful of personnel crossing the lot below, with purpose in their steps. For a man who had spent his life inside systems, he had always preferred to look outward. "It gets documented," he said finally, "investigated, processed the right way. No shortcuts. No quiet fixes." That was something else I had learned from him. "Even Brenner?" I asked. He nodded. "Especially Brenner." I let that settle. There had been a time when I might have asked why. Why not handle it quietly? Why not protect the reputation of the command? But I already knew the answer. Because reputation built on silence doesn't hold. Because systems that don't correct themselves eventually fail. Because for all the power my father carried, it wasn't meant to shield the truth. It was meant to serve it. I stood up from the chair, stretching slightly, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders from sitting still for so long. So I said, "What happens to the guard at the gate?" My father glanced back at me. "He followed what he was trained to follow," he said. "He'll be retrained. Not punished. Not dismissed. Corrected." "That seems fair," I said. "It's necessary," he replied. We stood there in the quiet for a moment. Then I asked the question I hadn't asked yet. "Why did you call me?" He turned fully this time. "Not as a general. As my father. Because I needed to know if you would see it," he said. "See what?" He held my gaze. The difference between what people say something is he said, and what it actually becomes when no one questions it. I considered that. Then gave a small nod. "And if I hadn't come," I asked. He didn't hesitate. "I would have finished it without you," he said. Of course he would have. "That wasn't the point. But you did come," he added. "And that mattered." Another pause. "Shorter this time." "Yes," he said. That was all. But it was enough. I walked with him back toward the hallway. The building felt different now. Not because it had changed, but because I had, or maybe because I finally understood it the way he did. At the checkpoint, the same guard was still on duty. He looked up as we approached. And this time, he stood. Straight. Immediate. His expression shifted the moment he saw my father. "Sir," he said, snapping to attention. Then his eyes moved to me. Recognition didn't come right away. But something else did. Uncertainty. The kind that comes when a person realizes the version of reality they've been relying on might not be the only one. My father stopped in front of him. "At ease," he said. The guard relaxed slightly. "Sir, he began. My father raised a hand. Not to silence him. Just to pause him. "You did your job," he said. "Now you'll learn to do it better." The guard nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." My father stepped aside, giving me a clear path to the exit. For a moment I just stood there. looking at the door. At the sign that still read, "Restricted Area." Then I turned back to the guard. "My name is Claire Hale," I said calmly. "I don't come here often." He blinked. Processing. Then, "Yes, ma'am." Not defensive. Not dismissive. Just adjusting. Learning. I gave him a small nod, then walked out into the daylight. The air felt different outside. Cooler. Cleaner. Or maybe that was just me. I paused at the edge of the lot and looked back at the building. From the outside, it looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Solid. Ordered. Unchanged. But I knew better now. Systems don't stay strong because they never face pressure. They stay strong because someone is willing to test them, to question them, to correct them when they start to drift. My father had done that today. Quietly. Completely. And in his own way, he had trusted me to see it. I got into my car but didn't start it right away. Instead, I sat there for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, thinking about everything that had just happened. About how easy it would have been to walk away at the gate. To accept what I was told. To let someone else define what was true. And how different the outcome would have been if I had. I let out a slow breath. Then finally started the engine. As I pulled out of the lot, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. The building grew smaller behind me. But the lesson didn't. In a world where things are repeated often enough to feel real, it matters who is willing to ask one more question. If this story meant something to you, if it made you pause or think or remember a moment when you chose to question instead of accept, I hope you'll carry that with you. Maybe share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, quiet ones, thoughtful ones, the kind that stay with you, I'd be honored if you stayed with me.